Hello and welcome to the HR People Pod, the CIPD's fortnightly podcast bringing you the topical stories and expert insights on issues impacting business and the profession. My name's David D'Souza, I'm Director of Profession at the CIPD, and joining me in the studio we have...
Mel Steel.
Slightly unsure there. Do you want to... I've met her before, it is Mel Steel, I can vouch for that.
Caroline Roberts.
And...
Jo Carlin.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you back. Jo, I think this is your... Third time for you? Third time for you, Mel? Second time for you, Caroline. So it's a bit of catching up. It's like the hardcore audience.
Available, I thought.
It's a mixture. Like there's a Venn diagram, and you're both available and
quite
dedicated. Yeah. So just before we get started, we always have a section where we talk about what people have been reading, watching, consuming, finding interesting. Jo, if I start with you.
Oh, God. Right. So I have had a book recommendation that I've got in my order of Amazon called The Messy Middle. And our CEO recommended it. So I'm going to give that a good read. I am reading some nonsense fiction as well. I think last time I talked about did I say I was reading The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat?
Yes.
By Oliver Sacks. That's a really good one. And also Social, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect. That's a brilliant one. I keep picking that up and putting it down. It's quite chewy.
So what's the messy middle about?
Where businesses are going through change. So the beginning of the change is usually quite energetic, whole businesses are on board, and then everyone talks about the end when the changes happen. But the messy middle is all the stuff that happens or has to happen with processes and policies and culture. And so it's the messy middle, and that's the most difficult.
Excellent. Mel, come to you next.
Okay. This is new. We didn't do this last time.
No, things change, right? The world moves on.
Wow.
Yeah.
So book-wise, not anything at the moment, deliberately, because I wanted to do more kind of podcast reading and just not have 500 articles saved that I need to go back and read and then by that time. So I'm trying to do more in the moment stuff. I've been watching, I don't know how I missed this before, but that program about Round the World,
Race Across the World.
Yeah, Race
It's
Across
the greatest
the World.
thing ever. It's lovely.
I don't know how I missed it before, but I think I saw an advert for the celebrity one. And then I realised that it had gone back, and I'm absolutely loving it in the sense of, as anyone who knows me knows I love, I've never backpacked or anything, but actually even watching this, I'm saying to my husband, how amazing would it be to just go off and go through, this. I mean, maybe not quite as extreme as what they're doing, but just to go through these different countries and understand. And it does restore my faith a little bit of how helpful and kind people can be. Where there's a lot of press where it's all a bit dark and gloomy, watching this program, I kind of think, yeah, actually, sometimes you just have got to get back to basics and away from the big bad world. And
particularly in Canada. If you saw the Canadian one, all you had to do was stand at the side of the road and you go, I'm trying to get to the other side of the country, and someone would go, oh, that's fine, I'll drive you there for no reason.
So nice.
So nice. Defeated the object of the whole program. They had a limited budget, but any Canadian would take you anywhere and feed you with their family and take you in.
Yeah, so
awesome
I'm watching that with husband, and we're thoroughly enjoying that and playing into the whole kind of future travel and trips that we might do.
There's maybe an HR version to be done. Actually, just get senior professionals and we'll race from one end.
Well, we're just nobody's giving us a lift.
We'll do an extended podcast based on that. I'll free up a week next year.
I would love to do that.
Caroline.
Well, rather like Mel, I'm listening to a lot of podcasts. I'm really into The Rest is History at the moment, because I think there are a lot of HR lessons that can be learned from things like the French Revolution, and it makes you realise that things aren't quite as bad as we think. But what I'm reading at the moment is actually a book about the life and times of Machiavelli, which I actually think is essential reading for anyone who works in human resources.
And do you want, for anyone who's not familiar with Machiavelli, do you want to give a broader overview?
He's known for writing a book called The Prince, and it's a study of leadership, and it has top tips in things like doing complicated exits as an HR director. And his advice is very much do it very swiftly, exit someone so that they don't have time to gather their ammunition or the details for their ET1. But there are an awful lot of parallels for today's budding HR professional.
Yeah, like archly practical. So for any students who are listening or people who haven't heard of Machiavelli before, existed at the time of the Italian city-states, so lots of competition between the individual cities. He wrote a practical primer on essentially how to run a city-state effectively. And it's probably a nice companion piece with Sun Tzu's The Art of War, which is obviously slightly more aggressive, but they're both sort of timeless texts that tell you how to do a thing in a really functional way, whether or not you agree with that thing.
It makes what I'm watching watching Emily in Paris, which is none of the above.
It's tonally similar.
I'm drawing lots of parallels.
In years to come, in like 200-300 years,
they'll be talking about it.
They'll talk about it in the same way as The Prince by Machiavelli.
Exactly. That's what I think. I'm just ahead of the curve.
That's got a place too, Emily in Paris, for the outfits, for sure.
Like, it's about rain. Lots of you will have come into contact with is the issues around Harrods that have come up in the media and the allegations there, and a large number of women coming forward to talk about hugely traumatic, life-changing experiences. I read the deeper BBC article yesterday, and it genuinely, it's difficult to read it and not have a physical reaction to it. Some of the stuff in there is absolutely horrific. We covered sexual harassment on the last podcast. We covered how it feels to be an HR professional when something horrific hits your desk or an allegation happens. We covered the changes in the law in the UK around your duties in that space. And we covered actually the level of prevalence as well. So we won't be covering that in detail because I think 2 in a row would be too much. But please, if you are interested in that, there's some really good content there. As I say, we only published a couple of weeks back. Equally, the entire month we've been focused on conflict in the workplace and sexual harassment as part of that. So if you go on our LinkedIn feed, we go onto our website, you will find information around that as well. So I'm going to park that and try and change the tone. But as I say, it's not that we're ignoring it. We've covered it quite extensively recently. You will have heard some of our advisors on the radio, kind of in the press this week as well. We will never comment on an individual organisation. We will talk about actually what organisations need to do in situations like that. First story today. Could we be seeing 90s science fiction coming to life? So a large retailer has introduced its own RoboCops, robotic security guards known as PID 360. To combat rising thefts in stores, which is a genuine problem and a genuine issue of risk for retail staff, as well as the financial impact, across Manchester, Bristol and Newcastle. These devices, according to the press, emit a loud warning siren and a menacing message in a Northern Irish accent, which seems like a very specific design choice has been made there, which probably raises its own questions, and are designed to deter intruders. It comes as new research from Thomson Reuters says 2/3 of legal, tax and accounting professionals thinks AI could save them hundreds of hours. There's a piece here around how we utilise technology most productively. There's also a piece around job displacement. Again, as the professional body for HR, we'll be covering a lot more of that in times coming. And the people development opportunity of what we do is key there as well, because in terms of reskilling people and keeping them up to date. Joe, if I come to you first, you can either talk, I'll give you 2 choices. You can either talk in depth about the RoboCop security guard, or you can talk more generally about the issue and job displacement.
I just think Terminator. You know, I can't help it.
Oh, that's worse, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think there's part of me that, I don't know, certainly for what it's being utilised for, whether we agree or disagree with the use of Northern Irish accents is irrelevant. I think you're right. I think there's roles that AI can play that arguably, as people, human beings, is probably better for us not to be doing that. I think in general, if I look at AI in general, I don't know, there's a lot of talk about displacement of roles and what it's going to mean. But actually, maybe it's just not displacement. Maybe it's just changing. Maybe it's just that we need to change, and we need to change how we look at stuff, and we need to change how we look at security, for example. So maybe we don't need a load of security guards because actually that's putting them in danger potentially. But maybe we need something else from those individuals to look at it differently. I think it's the same with everything, though. It's the same with every profession. And to look at it critically and ethically, and work with people to say, how can we enhance? But give them an opportunity to say, okay, your role might not be this, but it could be this. I'm going to go to Newcastle next weekend. I'm going to go looking out for RoboCop.
Okay. I mean, I hope to see you again. I hope that doesn't end bad.
And take a picture and send it to you, David.
Well, I will look forward to that. Caroline, thoughts?
There was a study recently, I think it was BCG did it, when they were looking at the role of AI and how it could help productivity. And it did help all performers. But where things required interpretation, there wasn't so much of a role for AI. And I think, it's very easy to jump to conclusions with AI and, talk in very blanket terms. But I think it's really important that teams to get together, talk about what AI can do, what they found, but also its shortcomings. Because you think about the security guard, I think was it the Ed 209? Was the RoboCop?
It was, yeah. You have 30 seconds to comply.
Yeah. I mean, quite honestly, with looking at the resourcing and policing, if someone goes and steals a load of fillet steak from Marks and Spencer's, whatever, what's going to happen at the moment? There's not the infrastructure. So it's almost a bit of, well, look over here. There's something going on over here, when in fact there are other much bigger issues. I think with the other thing around anything to do with AI, it's a leadership challenge. It's a people challenge. It's not just a bit of tech, and things will always change. And if you travel on the London Underground or any tube or train service now, in the mornings, everyone's looking down at their phones. 20 years ago, they might have been reading the paper. Things change. This will happen naturally. But I think it's also human nature, rather like with the Luddites, going back to them, smash the equipment, things like that. There will always be work. There will always be an alternative. There will always be a change. It won't be the same. But it's easy to jump to conclusions, and sometimes the wrong conclusions.
For anyone who doesn't know about the Luddites, Caroline's spin-off podcast around historical movements and books in history will be available very soon. But yeah, the interesting thing about the Luddites, I'm sure most people know about them, but the interesting thing isn't they weren't against technology. They wanted to create a pause to allow a period of readjustment. And I think that's the interesting thing with the pace of technology that we're seeing now. Mel, I know you've got some well thought out views on this.
Damn, I better go and get them. No.
Is it too big a build-up?
Yeah, again.
From my point of view, Mel's got some really good views. They're coming up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, theft is a big issue in retail, right? But as Caroline said, there needs to be a different way to deal with it. I'm not sure that's going to deal with it, but I don't want to minimise the fact that it's hard on retail staff having to try and deal with stuff. And in these particular locations, I'm sure that it's rife and not great. And so they're trying what they can, I guess, to try and be a deterrent. So let's see if that pays dividends at all. On the AI side of things, I think things are moving quick, right? I kind of every week, I kind of drop the book reading thing because I'm like, hell, I don't think I can catch up at the moment of how quick things are moving. And there was an article this week by Andy Spence, who does the futuristic stuff. I think it was Matteo that had written it this week, but he was explaining, it takes a bit of reading sometimes, but explaining with software engineers, just how close is AI performing to those, and redoing the tests they did 6 months ago and how close they are now in the reasoning side of things. And you go, this is a lot to get your head round. There is obviously huge benefits, but there's also, I think HR have a difficulty because yes, there's about the roles and stuff, but the ethics piece is the thing that probably keeps me awake most at night, because it's the thing that people probably don't want to focus on so much. Everyone's very excited about the shiny new object side of things, but no one really wants to think sometimes about the consequences, and then it's typical that HR have to kind of step in and help with some of that. And there was also, I think it was Hung Lee that had done some 2025 predictions for recruitment in that talent acquisition space, how much further the human interaction kind of is going to be. And I think it only really comes to life. I was with 300 odd students this week, and they're all going into the workplace, next year. And like, you know, when they're talking about their experience so far of kind of, you know, recruitment or graduate schemes or understanding them, they don't have any contact with anyone. And so when a human actually turns up, the queue was like as if I knew all the answers, but it was like, you know, long in that sense of people just wanting to ask a human, I guess, some stuff. So I think we've got our work cut out, but I think kind of just finishing off on that, there's still a lot of companies that don't have great HR software and technology in them. So when we're talking about this and the advancements, and like this week with there was the big conference Workday, wasn't there, in the US, in Vegas, I think, you know, about talking about the agents and stuff. You know, what about the organisations that haven't even got that in? And people say, oh, well, that's only the small start.
No, it's not.
And there's a lot of small organisations there, if you like, the backbone of the economy. So I think there's some really practical stuff. And please feel free to chuck some extra stuff in. One, where you are working with a software provider, look at the roadmap as well and the AI integration, because that's going to stop you having to go off and do it separately. Secondly, think really practically about use cases, because it's really easy to have a general chat about technology coming, but actually what problems are you trying to solve and where can it help you? Thirdly, don't be afraid to reach out to either through our communities or other means to other organisations that are facing the same challenges, so that you're not just feeling like there's a big overwhelming thing coming, but you're drawing on the resources and the people and the expertise that you have around you. Because I think otherwise it's really easy to ostrich it and go, I know there's something coming, but you know, it's not quite here yet. To your point around the ethical problems and the ethical challenges, you need the time and space to think those things through.
Yeah.
And I'll give a really practical example. I was chatting to someone around utilisation in a contact centre. And what they said is they'd stripped away a lot of the low value calls or the repetitive calls, but it only left the really intense calls.
Yeah.
And
all day.
That has a knock-on impact. Well, my organisation is a call centre, and it has a real knock-on effect on well-being. So it has and then you've got a whole range of new skills that you get caught out with if you're not careful and you move too fast. If you flick that switch too fast, which we haven't, you're stuck.
And it was the first time that I'd ever heard it, because to me it always seemed to make sense, doesn't it? Like, we'll remove the transactional stuff, so you deal with the more complex stuff, and that's best use of everyone's time. Customer gets it faster, and the individuals get to work on, you know, not having to update. But they were like, that's the breathing space that you're taking away from people. So I think there's a lot around job design, job crafting that we need to get really careful with actually as we go about this. And I was chatting to a really large contact centre about that and the implications.
And I think that's where it's not just an IT implementation. It's not just HR. It is a whole business issue. I mean, somewhere where I've seen it done really well is around stroke pathways in the NHS. And at the trust where I work, there's been some brilliant work around there in terms of looking at people's scans, because if you ring, you know, someone rings 999 because they think you've had a stroke, it's really important that you're treated as soon as possible. Every hour counts. But trying to get somebody to look at that, to compare things, that's something where AI can come in. And they've had much, much better patient outcomes from doing that, which they have then translated into the community. AI is looking at data from community GP practices and then seeing if anyone's at risk, can they, you know, treat people, giving them preventative medicine. But that's been done step by step with the clinicians, and not as a separate thing that's suddenly an implementation or transformation.
I think businesses struggle though, because there's such a lot of pressure on costs.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
AI, in a way, or other digital solutions offers some way of saying, right, we can reduce our costs because we can bring this in.
Do more with less.
And so the unintended consequences, or the thinking through, which it sounds like the NHS is doing, the thinking through piece goes, because they're like, well, I just need to do it because I need to reduce my costs over here. And so that's where I would imagine you get that, the person in the big call center, that's what's happening, because it's like, well, we've got to reduce costs because we've got client issues, and so we'll go fast, and then suddenly, like you said, it all rolls to
The big piece in
HR.
the Financial Times yesterday was around Workday, Salesforce. They're selling the AI agents as a way to help boost productivity and reduce cost. Exactly that. How many roles can we take out? No, it's not about redeployment and
productivity and efficiency are different things, as is cost and investment. And I think there's a real lens piece that HR can't do in isolation. The conversations with finances to go, look, you are seeing a saving and therefore we can lose people. We are seeing the ability to finally get the most out of the talent that we have in the organisation. And if you don't have those conversations early, it's going to be challenging. I was speaking at the NHS Employers Conference, and it was really interesting to your point around AI, the utilisation that they've got there, both on the people side, but also in terms of some of the clinical and support pieces. And we'll probably, having some conversations, we'll probably get someone on from the NHS to talk about that in a bit more depth. I'm going to summarise the next topic really, really quickly. So we're going to get into the heart of it very quickly. People are working more hours than they're contracted to. That isn't particularly new. But IOSH have reported that over half of them are still working whilst feeling unwell, so presenteeism challenge there. And 1 in 4 people are working more than 48 hours per week. Are extra hours par for the time if you want to get ahead? I'm going to go for that as like the kind of biting question. Is it still a case that discretionary effort needs to come in the form of hours, and if you want to progress your career, you should be the last person to kind of log in, or the first in, or to turn up a little bit earlier, and like the whole, coat over the chair or whatever it used to be? Mel, what are your thoughts?
Being first in and last out doesn't make you someone who is, using your discretionary effort necessarily wise. And it shouldn't be the same person doing that. I think there's multiple things there. I think if people are doing work, they should be paid for it. There's a simple kind of, for me, basic equation in that. I have a big issue with companies that, as someone who worked in restaurants, and stuff in my early career, sometimes they used to try and change it. Say, you need to be here, 20 minutes before to do, but you didn't get paid until. My view is you need to be there, that you start work on the time that they're paying you from, right? That's what contract's about in that sense. I think, as you go through your career and then you're being salaried and you're expected to maybe do other ways, there's ways to do that, and flexible working and how that works. But I also think, speaking, to younger folk today, I like the fact they're a lot more kind of appreciative of their time and where they want to spend it, if I'm really honest on it. I was someone that went through my career and very much, would do extra hours and was told if you did this, you'd get that. I didn't really challenge it, if I'm honest, and probably made some quite big sacrifices personally to do that. But I'm pretty proud of like some of the people that I speak to now who are in their 20s, bright, energetic, in really, really great jobs in companies, but refuse to, do this presenteeism to a bit. And actually, there's been a few of them who have left those jobs because the expectation been placed upon them is they have no life. I mean, I'm talking extreme. They're in at 6 a.m, they're there till 11 at night, they're expected to do stuff at weekends, like big companies, won't name them, but we know who they are. And they just like, I'm not doing that. I want to be able to, do my sport. I want to be able, they work hard, and that's not the issue. But this kind of, there is definitely this piece that's jarring, which is slightly different, that career piece, than if you're hourly paid type work and, you're not getting paid for the hours that you do. So I don't think it's a bad thing on individuals pushing back on what I did. I mean, I can't lie.
And setting boundaries.
And setting boundaries. And actually, now I would not give up doing something that was personally for me, whether that's, fitness or what have you. I would really hold it hard because I know how important it is to me. And the fact that they've got that understanding in their 20s to do it, it will actually serve them better, I think, in the workplace and in the future. So I think they're probably more that's how it should be, not the presenteeism bit. But if we're talking about hourly pay kind of stuff and being exploited, no, if you're doing the hours, you should be paid. If you're going over a certain, then you should get paid overtime, that kind of thing.
I think the HMRC has nailed that one though, hasn't it, for the hourly paid? I know for sure a couple of organisations I've worked in have been on the receiving end of some pretty meaty audits, and certainly I think that's And I'm not, by no means against that. I think that's the right thing to do. But I'm with you, Matt. I think there's a big difference between discretionary effort and presenteeism. And my generation, which is slightly older than the generation now coming through.
That was so delicately put.
There wasn't it? Thank you. It's
It's
because it's podcast and nobody can see me, David. That's what it is. I think there's a difference because we thought presenteeism was discretionary effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. We were the whole, we've got to be the first ones in. I mean, who cared? I was playing solitaire, sometimes at 7 a.m. But what
Eat
did
your
they
breakfast.
know? I was there. I mean, I wasn't. Any past employers, I was working really hard. But I think there's a massive difference, isn't there, between presenteeism, which as I'm just going to turn up and be there, frankly, or discretionary effort, which is I'm going to come and I'm going to do my best work for that organisation whilst I'm there. And I think that's the piece that we all need to get right in our own minds, because I'm with you. I'm not giving up some of the stuff that I probably would have given up. Yeah. I mean, I was the person who said yes to every project. I think that's different.
Yeah.
And I say that to a lot of people who are coming through now that that you mentor along the way. There's a big difference between always being available, like all of the time, and saying yes to the stuff that's going to stretch you and pushing yourself out that comfort into the stretch. And I think that that's a really healthy rebalance that's happened maybe over the last decade or so.
I remember having a conversation with a colleague years ago. I hope if she is listening, this conversation took place and you'll know the one. And she was working until 9 o'clock every night. And I was saying, why are you doing that? And she was going, because there's no capacity to cover it. And I was like, there's no incentive for the organisation to do anything other than have you work until 9 every night, because the work's getting done. You're not complaining or raising about it. I was like, you've locked that in. It is about those boundaries. And, that wasn't atypical, going back through the years. You would like to think, I guess, to your point, Mel, and to the kind of way you're framing it with the people you're mentoring, that we could maybe get better at that rather than wish the same on the next generation coming through. Because I think there is that we did the hard yards, so therefore you must, which you hear
I think it's ridiculous.
all too often, rather than like,
comment.
Wouldn't it be great if we could just create better working conditions for people, full stop? And if we could play a part in architecting that, is a far better ambition than, well, guess what, we suffered, so you're going to have to do the same if you want.
Just people are fatigued otherwise. Just getting to the weekend and they're dropping.
Well, absolutely, and I think there's actually some really negative sides to this. I mean, you've got the economic pressures. People want to keep their jobs. There are some managers who manage by fear. They want to get a bonus and things like that. Some managers measure performance by presenteeism rather than outcomes. I think there's a whole range of equality issues if that's the kind of work that people are expected to do. But I've noticed there's a lot of hybrid guilt. So people say, well, I'm going to work from home 2 days a week, but it's okay. I log on at 7 a.m. and I check my emails, and then I drop the kids, for 15 minutes. But then I'm back, and then I'll work in the evening as well, just because they feel they have to justify a hybrid working arrangement. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, I'd agree. Caroline, I'm going to come first to your next one, which is our newly launched resourcing and talent planning report, which you can download from the website. In fact, that's probably the only way you can get it, just thinking about it. Mate, if you asked me, I'd print
you could
it off,
write in and get it posted.
Yeah, if you see me, I might have a copy on me. But it's a low frequency event. Found that more than a quarter of employers had new hires simply not show up. And over 2/5 had new joiners quit within a year. I guess the second bit of that's maybe a bit less surprising. That feels like one for the ages. But a quarter having new hires just simply not show up. Is it a sign of the times? Do we think that's reflective of the market? Or are they indicators of actually some things we've spoken about with different expectations, different commitments to employers?
I don't think it's a new thing. I worked somewhere once where after I'd been there about a week, they said, well, you're doing better than the other person who joined a couple of weeks ago, because they climbed out through the toilet window during the 11 a.m. break on the first induction day. I admire their ingenuity, actually, for doing that, as well as they
get through the window.
I admire their flexibility. Take me a good few hours to do that.
Couldn't they just go through the door?
Yeah, it'd have to be a very big window for me, I think. It's interesting. It's part of the employer-employee contract, though, and some places you work, they will have a great induction. You're really committed. The induction starts before you join. They've already won hearts and minds, and others, you may feel it's a bit of a privilege to join them. And I think if you're in a profession where there is that kind of choice, you do see the dropouts, but I don't think it's anything new in particular. I think people have always done that. There is something about the expectations. So I don't see that this is a particularly new story. People have always been climbing out of those toilet windows.
I'm not sure that's true as a sentence. That feels like...
And also lots of windows don't open.
Yeah. I think between us we have a fair degree of experience, and the toilet window climbing was quite new and novel.
I think it's
me.
a good soundbite for this podcast.
Yeah.
It is.
If you ever feel like climbing out the toilet window, listen to the podcast.
Or listen to the podcast whilst you're climbing out of the toilet window.
Either way.
Pass the time.
Either way.
Mel, your thoughts on it? New, old, stuff that we can do?
I think in some industries, for sure, it's draining. When you're doing high volume type recruitment, you put a lot into it and people not even letting you know. I also was quite surprised last year of seeing profession people in HR too, and I don't know why I have higher kind of threshold for HR practitioners
because we're
in
better.
it. Because I feel like that should be, if you're in there, trying to advise.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're a better person. Just know that. Of them doing the ghosting as well, of being in quite a big process and then just suddenly disappearing out of it, and no conversation, no honesty, and it's a small world, right? We all know we're 1 degree of separation from someone. It's a relationship.
If you do go, we're gonna go and find where did you go, because I'm just nosy like that. Because if you do that ghosting, and seeing it happen, with a lot of colleagues when they were hiring, I just find that incredible of doing that. And I think at some point you have to be careful that doesn't catch up with you. I wonder if it will be difficult going forward, because some of this is about how much you're bought into organizations. It's a really difficult market as well out there. And I'm always would say to people, be conscious, be honest, because there's other people that would, die to get those opportunities too. And, years and years later, no matter what we seem to do in the resourcing recruitment world, it just still blows my mind that we've got all these great people who want to go and do something great, and then we've got all these employers that are looking for great people. But no matter what tech, no matter how we do it, we still seem to have this disconnect.
Yeah, the match is never
of
perfect.
Getting the right people in the right place at the right time to use that.
Jo, you're a large. Well, you're not personally a large employee.
I am a large.
You're an individual person.
I thought you were just going with Jo. You are large as an employer.
High risk.
Waiting for you to dig that hole.
Say some things.
Oh yeah, we're a pretty large employer. In fact, we've just acquired another organisation that's added another 2,000 on as well. So we're pretty large, high volume.
Yeah.
No shows, bounce outs, whatever you want to call them, are fairly commonplace. But getting less. And they're getting less because what we've done, to go back to your point, Carlin, is we've actually said, what can we digitize, outsource, and which leaves us free to do the onboarding. The human content. I think going back to your piece, Mel, at the beginning, where you said you had this huge queue of people, we found that by flipping it and pushing all of the, the administration, the stuff which really isn't making any difference, out, and just having a few good people focused on talking to the people coming in, it's had a massive difference, because it's big money. It's huge money for us. If we're churning, it can be catastrophic. So we've managed to reduce our attrition rates pretty significantly. I think something like 50% over a year, which is bucking the trend. But I'm like you, we're seeing it more and more in professional roles, not necessarily HR, but that's probably because I haven't hired too many people in HR.
Yeah.
But other roles, significantly senior roles, you get into the very point where they're hired, they're onboarded, they've got their kit. And then you get a call the week before. They go really quiet, and then
Yeah.
they say, "Oh, I decided to stay where I am."
For anyone early in your career, particularly as you kind of reach the point where actually some of the choices you might make are more relationship driven, as Mel says, and Joe's kind of points out, that's the kind of thing that can stick. So those relationships matter. You want someone to think, actually, this person's dependable. So,
Or they're just going to be honest with you.
yeah, honesty helps, doesn't it? We have a section that we call Is It a Thing? Where we take something that's either blown up in the media or online, and we go like, is that a buzzword or is it actually a thing? I was asked earlier in the week, and you may have seen some articles about it. Genuinely, I had to write to our media team and go, specifically, am I being asked a question around unbossing or conscious unbossing? Because they're two different things. So really quickly, unbossing is organisations removing the middle management tier in the belief that it's going to create a better connection between the leadership and purpose of the organisation and the frontline staff. We've seen some organisations commit to that as kind of a framework of thinking that they need to do in a different way. Conscious unbossing is coming from the other side of that equation, which is primarily Gen Z, potentially more than half of Gen Z, according to one report, not wanting to be middle managers because it's just not worth the hassle. So it's too stressful. Management's too big a headache. Doesn't pay enough to make up for the reality of having to look after a group of people. And so that's been termed conscious unbossing. So Robert Walters, I think, have coined that term in quite a smart move, I think. It's lots of media coverage. So, Joe, I'm going to come to you first. Is conscious unbossing a thing? Should it be a thing as well? Because actually, I think we had a chat earlier and we were like, yeah, fair play.
I think if they can figure out how to get to the leadership level that they're all wanting to get to and not do the messy middle bit, then kudos to them. Honestly, the reality is nobody wants to do that bit. Nobody ever wants to do that bit. Because you're right, you get all of the pressure, lower paid, everything's coming to you from below and above. But you've kind of got to work through it. But I know we were having a conversation earlier saying this also plays into the I want it and I want it now, moving around. And that's not generational. I think that's multi-generational. Yeah, I don't think it's got anything to do with what year you were born. I think it's now has to do with where do I want to get to? The market's a bit tight. I'm probably not going to get to that role. I need to earn a bit of money because my mortgage has gone up. So I think, it's a clever article. Is it a thing? I don't think it's a thing. I think it's just a nice, clever article. But if it is a thing, I want it. I want part of it. So just saying, I'm going to edge my bets. If conscious unbossing does turn out to be a thing, I'm going to say I talked about it on this podcast.
Early adopter. Caroline, is it a thing? Should it be a thing?
Well, I think it's always been there. When you're 21 years old, what is sexy about, I want to be a middle manager. I think that it's a really useful step. Get some management training in and some experience in having those difficult conversations. Get it in early, but you want to be the CEO. There's so much stuff about, if you're watching Succession, you don't want to be the person who's doing the governance reports at the end of the meeting. It's you want to do something exciting very often at that age, and it's just human nature. So it's not a thing.
But it is a critical role, isn't it? And I think it's a difficult role because you don't have the agency that you'd have in a senior role. You don't have the pay that you'd have in a senior role. You also don't have the ability to just switch off at the end of your day because you're taking care of people's well-being, you're taking care of people's development, and often you're relied upon to fix those kind of things.
I think it's an important step.
Yeah.
You kind of got to do it in order
Yeah.
to, I'm not really sure how you can become a leader if you haven't worked through that middle management piece and learnt your trade.
But haven't we all had to coach people who haven't had that step?
Or they've had that step and it would appear hasn't
Didn't pay
had an
attention.
impact. Yeah.
Didn't stay. Mel, final thoughts on this?
At the uni this week, they get polled on, what do you want to get out of the degree this year. And actually, one of the topics was about how do you manage people at work? How do you lead people? And when they were asked, what does that mean? Some of their experiences where they've had to do group activity and then been the lead, I guess, in that group, how badly it's gone. And one of them quoted, yeah, because they just didn't do what I asked them to do, which made me chuckle. Oh, welcome to our world, in that sense of things. And, it was a genuine thing. So A, I like that asking, let's have the conversation about it. B, you can't go through life not doing it. See, maybe it's one of those things that we need to bring back. I mean, it was a big thing when you joined the workplace. If you wanted to get on, there was brilliant management development, and stages you used to be able to go through. And it felt hard, but it felt like you were being, supported within that journey. Whereas now people just seem to get pushed into those types of roles. So maybe they're seeing more of that, and maybe not the supported side of it. And it's a big thing for us in HR, right? Because if you don't get that piece right, we know it falls on HR to either deal with it when it goes wrong, or we end up filling that void where you don't have good enough management. So I hope we can encourage them that you can get a lot out of it. But I'm also really aware, I think, when times get tough in businesses and budgets get pushed, you got to do more with less. Hybrid working, all of these things that have come about, it's hard to manage people, for sure.
I guess the overall tip from everyone is don't do middle management as a side hustle. That's probably that's the worst combo of all those things, isn't it? I'd like to say so much thanks to our guests today, Jo, Caroline and Mel. We've got a wealth of resources available for you to support you at any point. And as I mentioned at the top of the programme, we've concentrated this month on conflict. You'll find a lot on there, and sexual harassment. We've also just launched our new resourcing and talent planning report, and we've touched on some of the kind of headline figures from that and some of the trends. Publish new episodes of this podcast every fortnight, so make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us, and catch up with Anything on Demand, and keep sharing on the community. There's a lot of stuff happening, and the brilliant news is that it's all good. My name's David D'Souza, and this has been the HR People Pod. Thank you very much.